This is OffPlanet Radio. We begin the show tonight. Just note the passing of the late great Ray Bradbury, who has left this planet yesterday, and he was one of the influences on my life. I started reading Ray Bradbury when I was about 7 years old, and so we sadly report the passing of Ray Bradbury. And Ray, good luck out there in the cosmos. My guest for this show tonight, it's very interesting to have him on. The book is called Extraplanetary Experiences, Alien-Human Contact and the Expansion of Consciousness. And my guest is Thomas James Streicher, Ph.D. He has an extensive background. He was a student of Dr. John Mack, one of the pioneers in the field of alien research, notably alien abduction. And this book takes a somewhat different approach in that it focuses more on what he is calling extraplanetary experiences. It is first-hand accounts from people who have had, let's say, more positive contacts and contacts that enhance the expansion of human consciousness. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Randy. It's a great pleasure to be on.
Good to have you on.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, you know, this book really goes into some very deep areas, and we're going to have 2 hours to kind of unravel it. You started out, first maybe give us a little bit of your background and how you got into doing this particular area of research.
How far back you want me to go? Do you want me to go back when I started the research or back into my childhood?
If it starts at childhood, go there.
Well, I think it does. I'd like to give you just a brief on, how I was brought up and what my belief systems were, because I think they're a little bit different than most people. See, as a child, I was, I didn't believe in the Bible or the biblical God, although my parents wanted me to. Mm-hmm. They sent me to parochial schools, and really they wanted me to be a priest. Okay. But my problem with the Bible was that I just wondered how that could be everybody's reality. What about my story and those of others? It had a little different twist on things. But my parents, they just told me, stick with it. We'll keep you in these parochial schools. And I remember one summer even living with a priest during one of my summer vacations. They were hoping that someday I might join the Jesuit order and be saved. Yes. But by the age of 12, I really wasn't agnostic or atheist, but as far as they were concerned, I had already gone astray, because I mentioned that I felt I experienced what other people were considering the heavenly realms after a near-death experience. And the creation story of the Bible just didn't line up with that experience. The church at that time was proselytizing that life originated on Earth. Earth was the center of the universe, and there were no such things as extraterrestrials.
Right.
My experience was much different. I was already having contact with I consider to be extraterrestrial spirit guides. So that's kind of like how things started for me onto this.
You mentioned a near-death experience. I'm very interested in this because my background and my research indicates that NDEs are sometimes a precursor to other types of paranormal experience.
Well, I think that's a good point. That it wasn't my precursor, but I already had an extraterrestrial experience at the age of 9. But that kind of really heightened my consciousness in a sense to realize, well, that what I experienced at 9 is happening again. Reinforced my intention, so I was able to look at things a little bit differently. I wasn't persuaded by authority figures so much, and even with the church, that's a huge authority figure. Things are done a certain way, and they thought they had all the knowledge, but I knew inside, almost like it opened me up innately, with what I felt I had all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's what was supporting me. It wasn't these other people outside. Even my parents, were having a difficult time with me at that time because I just didn't agree any longer. So, yeah, the precursor for me was an ET experience at the age of 9, and then the near-death experience at 12 really reinforced, the earlier experience. So, but it can be, I don't want to argue the fact what you just said is very true, and it can be true for a lot of people that a near-death experience, yes, can be a precursor for other paranormal type experiences.
What was the nature of your earliest experiences? They were not, I take it, in the standard abduction scenario?
No, I've never been abducted, and that's probably one of the, you might call, problems. I'm a little biased about, the alien abduction phenomenon, even though I worked with John Mack, who was an expert in it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I just said, well, that doesn't align with my experience. I don't know. I've never had an experience with extraterrestrial that I could consider would have harmed me or abused me in any way. So, although I think some of the teachings have been rigorous, to say the least, but they weren't done through violence. So I have no violence, no abuse issues with, what I consider my extraterrestrial spirit guides. So that there's a little bit different slant there. What was your question now?
That was basically it. And I wasn't going for a bias. I wanted to get a general feel for your background because reading your book, I kind of sensed that there was a more positive accent on what you were presenting. And it's interesting, you just called them spirit guides. And that gets my attention as well.
Oh, okay. Good. Yes, agree with you. I think I do have more, but that's what I was asking for. I wasn't asking for, just like in this reality, we're living here today. If I want to have an abusive experience, I know how to do that. I know the people who to get in contact with, and I can go out to the local bar and have an abusive, experience. There'll be drugs involved.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can attract violence if I want to, but I'm not that kind of person. Like I said, these experiences early in my life helped me understand that wasn't the direction that I needed to go. But so it wasn't like it is something I had to learn. So I didn't mess around with a lot of violence in my life. Just like it doesn't attract me. I'm going to go elsewhere, and that's why I think I attracted these type of beings.
What kind of beings were they?
Well, beings, etherical, spirit guides, I would call them, usually always manifested, as spirit, and connecting in a way that was different, always telepathic communication, never anything oral, just like almost sensing it, having a sense that they were there. And then using my mind, of course, to contact them, and to communicate.
So basically, at a very early age, you were having experiences that were, in a sense, influencing your own early consciousness, your sense of a connectiveness to not just the planet itself, but what lies outside of it.
Now, of course, Randy, if you would have told me that, what you just said right now at 9 years old, I was just, what the hell are you talking about?
Exactly.
At 9 years old, I was really messed up. I couldn't talk to my parents about it. They had no idea what I was, experiencing, and I realized at that time I can't talk to a lot of people about it. I got to somehow figure this out. And that's, I just kind of weighed it and saying, well, is this really accurate? Am I having difficulties with my own mind? And there's always that, there's a curiosity part, but then there's also the part of, is this real?
Yeah.
Am I imagining this? Am I fantasizing this? So I was questioning my own thoughts and my own antiquity. You know what I mean?
Right.
Okay.
And at this period of time, I'm guessing this is pre-internet, probably not a lot of general information out there, not a lot of people to connect with, and you probably felt very isolated in your beliefs about this.
Well, you got that right. I think that's pretty much right on. I had, a few books, Adamski books were out, on UFOs and extraterrestrial contact. There was, Orfeo Angelucci. Well, I report these all in my book because these are the historical books that were really important for me in the development of the XPE, which I call it, the extraplanetary experience. So there was some literature available, but how much can you grasp when you're 9, 10 years old? But at least there was something. Okay, I can't say that there wasn't anything because there was a little something out there that I could associate and felt some support with. It wasn't from the church, it wasn't from the school, it wasn't from my parents. Outside of that, but I really had a strong innate sense that was a catalyst.
Has this experience carried through? Has it matured? Do you have the sense that this was something that was putting you on a trajectory towards your later life experiences and what you're doing now?
Well, of course, now when I look retrospectively, everything was perfect, all in order. But, during the time of my life, I was a 19-year-old father, okay?
Oh, really?
Yes. I was married in that relationship for 20 years, so I was helping to raise 3 daughters. And that was my priority. Of course, I always maintained this innate sense and belief, but I didn't have time to research it. I had to make money and to, raise my family. So I put it off to the side. Well, this is going to have to wait until I got more time. Well, then my oldest daughter turned 18, and the kids were getting older. We decided to get divorced, and then said, okay, whoa, I got some time. I can shift my career. And that's when I did it. I went, with the intention, of going into psychology and really throwing a monkey wrench into psychology.
Oh, so you're also subversive. I like that. So you went and studied psychology. How did you come to work with Dr. John Mack?
Oh, boy, that's good. I'll go back a little ways. Okay, in March of 2003, I was at graduate school, so just imagine this, okay? And I just presented my first dissertation proposal, which I entitled, Self-Reports of People Who Believe Themselves to Have Had Experiences on Other Planets. Now, that's pretty far out. And I was at a far out school already. This was a accredited school called the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in Palo Alto, California. And I was planning on getting my PhD there, and I was doing well. I was at to the point where you get to the latter part where you can, start preparing for dissertation, which basically is like writing a book, with the supervision of other PhDs. I always remember that day I presented this, this topic. And, the school was really unaware, and they were very skeptical of the content and validity of my topic, of course, but I always remember this one psychologist who was and a scientist also. He said to me privately, he said, "There are no damn aliens." That's what he said it to me. And he just basically told me, hey, he's not going to give me any support with my dissertation, okay? Another psychologist there accused me of misinterpreting Carl Jung's work. Are you familiar with Carl Jung?
Yes, I am, yes.
And, he wrote the Flying Saucer book, so I was presenting that. A lot of, these Jungian therapists and clinical people, they don't really know much about Carl Jung's interest and passion that he had for extraterrestrials. So they thought I'm a student telling them. And they just, they didn't like that. so they accused me of misinterpreting things. So anyway, to make a long story short, researching this topic that I just described to you became an underground activity for me. I met privately with extraterrestrial researchers and extraterrestrial experiencers across the U.S. and Europe to get the information that I needed, because I wasn't getting it at the school. But anyway, they did agree that I could pursue my topic. I'm trying to answer your question as accurately as I can.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
How I got the job.
Yeah.
What's that?
No, the story's interesting. Please.
Okay. So, believing in the possibility of extraplanetary experiences, was a huge, if not painful, stretch for almost everybody at the school I was going to. So, with that in mind, I thought I presented it well. I took like I said, these historical records with me. I always remember this day when I got to present it, because this was my opportunity to kind of like come out to the world about who I am. So I'm surrounding myself with books. I said, okay. I felt bold as hell. And went over everything. And I did. My audience was astonished, at the amount of evidence I was presenting to them. And so they basically, to make a long story short, they said, okay, we're going to approve your topic. Go ahead with your research. I said, wow, first part's done. I felt really well about that. So now the second part, and this is where we're going to get to John Mack, is that you got to get a dissertation committee together. And the school that I was at had no one qualified as an expert on this topic, So I had to go out. They basically said, well, you got to go out and find one. And I said, well, I'm going to try, So I did. And first of all, I asked them, who would you consider, talking to the school now, who are you going to consider to be an expert in this field? They said, well, if you can get Dr. John Mack on your committee, we'll take part in this study of yours. So I didn't know John Mack personally. I knew some of his books. I said, how am I going to get John Mack? Pulitzer Prize winner, Harvard psychiatrist professor, tenured professor. It's like, oh, man. And so I started calling his office. Didn't talk to him. Couldn't talk to him. I talked to his secretary for 3 months, trying to get it. Hey, is John ever going to be available for this? And then one day she called me. She says, John's going to call you Monday evening at 7 p.m. and discuss this with you. I said, oh, my God, I can't believe it. So sure enough, he called me with my first conversation directly with Dr. Mack. I explained my situation and how challenging this topic was, even for, an esoteric type school. He said, hey, that's no problem. He understood it completely.
Right.
Because, he knows he's been up against it, most of his time at Harvard, with some of the best. And he just said, okay, well, do it. I'll be on your side. After we talked for quite some time, you could tell I was very tenacious and passionate about the topic, and then I had some knowledge about the topic also. So I convinced him. He said, yep, let's do it. I'll write the letter. I'll send it to your school. And he did. And so now I was going strong. I had John Mack on my committee. I got 2 other committee members. I had a committee, and the research was beginning and going on. 6 months later, you probably know the story. In 2004, John Mack was hit and killed by a drunk driver in London.
Yes.
It was terrible. And basically, after the death of John, the Institute just told me, says, oh, we're not going to support your dissertation any longer. Your research ended. Switch your topic. So I was like, you can imagine how I was, I felt at that time. I already had a lot of information. It wasn't just 6 months. It was all the other stuff I had up to that. So I had at least, a year and a half into the dissertation, maybe even 2 years of research and everything together, getting to the final parts of the dissertation. And the school just said, no, without John, you're done. You're finished. So, I think I hope that answers your question of how I got together with John. But basically, after he died, the school said no. So I just said, okay, I'm withdrawn from the school. I'll find another school that will accept this. Mm-hmm. Then I went on to another dimension. I did find another school and worked with another expert mentor in the field, but it was at Saybrook University.
Okay. Yeah. So was this kind of then the seeds that went into the book?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that?
I said, was this the seed that kind of went into what ultimately became your XPE book?
Yes, the dissertation was a catalyst for the book, because a lot of research in my book that came out of the dissertation. Not all of it, I added to it. I made it a lot easier to read. Dissertations are pretty dry and very scientific.
Sure.
And so I said, I knew when I was working on dissertation I wanted to become a book, because I really wanted, I wanted to come out of the closet with this stuff. Here it was, almost 50 years old, and I said, this is time. I've been sitting on this way too long. Got to get this information out there. I said, dissertations don't really get read even. I said, I'm going in with the intention of making this into a book. So as soon as the dissertation was done, I was already, working with publishers, editors, trying to make the dissertation more readable, more reader-friendly to a wider audience. And that's so dry. And it's still, I kind of read it, it's still kind of dry, but there's a lot of information in a small book like this.
No,
there's
actually,
a lot more that's not in this.
I did not find it dry, actually. And while you qualified your research and published the questionnaires that you used and you gave the statistical abstract, I didn't find the body of the book dry at all, because the interviews themselves were, I thought, very engaging. And
thank you.
Were all of these interviews done for the dissertation, or did you do additional interviews later to augment that material for the book?
Yeah, I did additional ones. Plus, I have many more. There's going to be a sequel to this book, and I have a lot more information that didn't get into this book. So, yeah, I have many more interviews, and I did, like Ingo Swann, I went out to...
I was going to ask you about that.
I met with Ingo out there, in Manhattan, and interviewed him because I always liked Ingo, and I just wanted to make sure he got in, so...
Well, and you probably preserved something in that book by getting Ingo on the record, because he's very elusive.
Yes.
I would love to interview him. I am friends with a friend of his named Bob Dean, but I'm told that Ingo really doesn't want to do interviews anymore. In fact, in reading your interview, I was struck. It doesn't seem like Ingo really wants to do much of anything anymore. He comes off as kind of grumpy in the interview.
Yeah, he does. He was very specific. He wanted to keep it scientific, but I'll tell you, on the back burner, we had some really interesting conversations, okay?
I would imagine,
But off record, and tell you, that guy's got it together, and he's got a lot of information that's not in that interview that's in my book, okay? But he as far as the interview went, because he knew that I was going to accomplish this book, he just didn't want to look like he was... he wanted to make it very scientific. He was part of a scientific remote viewing experiment. And he really wanted that to be the highlight of his interview. He didn't want me questioning it, like, hey, this was a, scientific experiment. There were scientists there, and, he just really wanted that to be the focus. But then after that interview, we talked, you could imagine what we talked about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And have you read his books? Have you read Penetration? And
I've read two. Yeah, that was one of them. And it's been a while since I read these books. I'm not as familiar with him as I wish I were.
Oh, you should, because in his books he goes into great detail. To Kiss Earth Goodbye and Penetration were two that I would really advise people to read. Having
talked to Ingo, do you have any background yourself in what's called remote sensing or remote viewing?
Well, sure. Everybody has a possibility of psychic, of psi experience. It's like you just got to develop it. Everybody has this ability. So it's like, what do you want to learn? How much time you got? And how can you change your way of thinking? And yeah. Well, to answer your question, sure.
Okay. And the reason I ask you that is because children, I think, do this stuff, certain children do certainly, do this stuff almost seamlessly. And looking back later, as I have, I don't think we realized what we were doing at the time. You know, it's like looking back on early contacts and you realize there was something mystical there, but you didn't understand it. And then later on, when I studied remote viewing, I realized I've done this before. I just did it from a different modality. I did it from a place of just opening up. And it seems to me like our social conditioning, our religious structures, our educational systems are all designed to zip that part of us down so that those who have experienced it basically lose it, and those who have never experienced it really get that aspect of their capacities almost stillborn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right on with that. You know, like I said, I think everybody has that ability, you know, to be psychic, you know, and just got to develop those senses. And it takes time, patience, and support. And you're not going to find it in the mainstream, okay, consensus reality. You know, they're not going to support you on that. It's like something you got to, like I was mentioning the word underground, go underground with it. And that's where a lot of the answers are, and you're going to find a lot of support there, but it's out of, you know, the mainstream. And a lot of people just want to stay in the mainstream. They want to stay in consensus reality so they're not looked upon as being somebody odd or different, you know. So unfortunately, a lot of people lose their potential for psychic abilities because of dominant worldview and consensus reality. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is.
Do you think that's changing? Do you think that because we're in this time now, and I call it the shift, you could call it whatever you want, but it seems like, and largely because of the internet, because there's this almost wide open kind of thing going on now, that there is a wider acceptance, and I'm even seeing it in the mainstream as spirituality is shifting, of these very things that we're talking about that largely before were not discussed or were not practiced.
Well, I kind of agree with you, and I kind of don't agree with you. Like I said, I just got out of, I've been out of graduate school now for a couple of years, but, you know, I've been around some of those supposed to be the new mainstream thinkers, okay, and they're still having a hard time with it, you know, and there's a lot of students that are still convinced that, you know, raising consciousness is more money in my pocket kind of attitude yet, you know what I mean? So I don't really think that consciousness is shifting that quickly. I think it's shifting for some people, maybe like yourself, you know, that realize it's time that you want to develop this and get on with this other part of your life that you may have not been able to do. So I think it all comes individually, subjectively, for when people are ready. That's what I put in the book too. I think that on a group conscious level, boy, I'd really have to.
Well, I have this theory, and it's kind of based loosely on observation of human nature. It's not scientific. That the leading edge of anything is, I guess, what you would call a thin wedge. Basically, the people who move things are probably less than 1% of the total body of people. Meaning, I'm looking at probably a substrate of consciousness and going, I do see a change. If I look at mainstream humanity, no, I don't. But the encouraging part is there's more of us now than I think there were 10 years ago.
Well, of course, the population's increased that much, just in general. But, I'm a psychologist, too, so I work with people that have difficulties, especially with drug abuse. And, I'll just be real honest with you, most people do not want to change. They say they want to change, but when it comes down to when they realize just how hard it is to change, they back out. And they say, well, I really didn't want it that bad. Adios, I'm out of here. I'm going to just die, hooked to heroin or alcohol or, whatever. Mm-hmm. So my experience has been a little bit different, I agree. But when push comes to shove, most people, this is, my personal subjective experience, and also the people that I've been working with, that they really don't want to change. And it's more comfortable to stay what they're doing to actually reach out, go that step beyond to find out what's there, because they don't know what's there, and the fear starts entering. Well, at least I know what to expect if I stay what I'm doing right now. Even though it's destroying my life, at least I know what to expect. I'm going to die from an overdose of heroin, or I'm going to die from this, that, or the other thing, and they know it's they think that is better than facing the fear of change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I guess that's just hard to admit, and you probably see it. It is. Well, for you, that's boots on the ground, everyday fact, and I understand.
Yeah, I work with homeless people every day. I could do it 24 hours a day. There's so many homeless and below poverty level people. I could do it constantly, So there's an abundance of people, in dire straits right now. I don't know how it is in Pennsylvania, but out here in California, well, I tell you, people are leaving here by the girls because the economy really sucks.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a large homeless population there?
Yes, we do. Yeah, of course we do. I think most of this is hidden now. The media doesn't deal with it anymore. We are not a culture that wants to confront our own ugliness. And so to a large degree, we're kind of inoculated from it by denial, because we don't really have a news media that actually reports anything of substance anymore. Right. This is all swept under. I mean, it's all night, and I'll just, here I go. It's real nice and good that every Thanksgiving they open up the food banks and people parcel out turkeys, but there's like 360 days a year that nobody gives a crap about most people on the street. They view them as a nuisance.
That's correct.
And that's, again, part of the social conditioning. We're not a culture globally, or certainly not in America, that wants to take care of its own. Mm-hmm. So it kind of stems back into the same sickness from my standpoint. We deny our own malaise, and so we deny the malaise of the culture at large. That's kind of the sickness that I see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've preached now.
Yeah, that was a good preach. I mean, I look at it very similarly, but I would call it, our dark side. How we never want to look at our dark side, and the dark side is where you find the light. You got to realize that, hey, everybody has a dark side. We all have these intentions, thoughts that, that we don't like about ourselves. Envy, jealousy, rage, and so we repress and repress and repress. And, we put it in the junk bag and we carry it around, and and then all of a sudden you see a homeless person in your face. You say, God, I hate that person. And here's just a person trying to survive, doesn't have anything. And a lot of times they get the hell beat out of them. Do you know the hate crimes involved with homeless people?
Yes.
I'm talking people that perpetuate hate crimes against homeless people.
For a brief period of time in the late 1970s, I lived in New York City, and in the 1970s, late 1970s, early 1980s were kind of a low point for New York. And I remember walking through parts of the city with the homeless on the streets, and I remember the disparaging remarks and the looks from people and the comments, basically, we need to sweep these people off the streets. Mm-hmm. Well, lo and behold, less than a decade later, they elected a mayor who did that. He literally busloaded them out of the city and disenfranchised them there, that scattered them, and they solved their poverty problem, at least visibly.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Doesn't work.
I have a question and a comment from the chat room.
Oh, good.
This one is addressed to you. During your telepathic encounters with ET energy beings, did you encounter a group telepathic mind state that connected 20 to 30 plus minds spread amongst many different planets?
Never.
Okay.
It was all individual. There is such a thing as, a galactic type of council, but they're all individuals at that council.
Okay, so you never had the sense of a group entity?
No.
Okay. The other one is a comment. I remember when I was a baby, 2 years oldish, expecting adults to know what I wanted and needed, expected telepathic communication, and was puzzled that it did not happen. Like she says, it's a comment. So I guess in a way that kind of beckons back to, is that simply an infant's view of the world for fulfilling primal needs, or is that maybe a memory of, well, remembering when you're 2 years old is kind of unusual anyway.
Well, I don't know. I think it's good to remember back to as far as you possibly can. I think it's good to remember. Now, this is going to sound a little weird, but, if you really go into deep meditations, I do a lot of inner work. So, of course, I got in touch with past lives. I'm not just saying this life. Remember your other lives, that personally. Okay, I'm talking for myself now. I believe we're all connected to the beginning. We all have this innate sense that we go back to the beginning. Now, the beginning, think about that. It could be trillions and trillions of years ago. Who knows? It's like the universe or the cosmos. There's no end to it that we know of. Well, the same thing is reflected inside ourselves. So when I'm talking about inner work, I'm talking about going way back. Okay, not to when you were just in this body, but in other possible bodies, and when you were maybe in the state of spirit. And that's where the answers are.
That's actually very interesting. I just did an interview last week with a Aboriginal shaman healer who was talking about the same thing. This actually seems to be now a synchronistic meme that's perking up to the surface. I'm interested in that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So there's ways of developing inner work. There's different techniques, and basically it comes down to this, Randy. I'm just going to tell you right off. You got to spend a lot of time with yourself alone, and when you can do that, because that's when all these demons, all this dark stuff starts coming in, and you can start dealing with it. That's when you're going to get to those other parts of who you are. But most people back off because it gets so scary, it gets so lonely about being alone for that amount of time that they back off. Hey, that's it. That's enough for me. Adios. And they don't have the guidance, to get through that. It's that simple. Because every one of us have the answers within us. Every one of us. I mean, there's no one person that's better than somebody else. There's just maybe somebody that's put more time into it. When we talk about developing psychic abilities, it's the same thing. We're talking the same thing here.
Well, and that goes down to this conversation. We view people who are extraordinary, and Ingo Swann is a great example of that because he's noted for being an exceptional psychic. But most people look at that as a gift and not as something that you actually work on.
Well, they're wrong. They actually work on that.
Yeah. No, anybody that I know that's working in the area of psychic phenomena is doing it as an ongoing part of their life. They are also doing the inner work, which is what you just described so well. It's the meditation. It's the dealing with the demons. It's the anguish that goes through self-reflection. And basically, because religion's a placebo and doesn't deal with this, we have a culture, again, that's never been driven to go to those inner resources.
Yeah. Well, you got a good point there. I'm glad you got listeners that are listening, because I think you're right on with a lot of that. But like I said, we're all going to meet the threshold. The threshold meaning when we're alone by ourselves and the fears start coming in, you got to, the answer is working through that fear. The answer is working through that pain of working through that fear. And when you're ready to back out, say, well, I'm going to give it another 10 more seconds. Just stay in there a little bit longer each time. I'm not saying you got to be a masochist about this, but just stay in there a little bit longer, then leave. But it's almost like learning how to meditate. When the first time you sat there and you tried it for 5 seconds, geez, I got all this shit coming in my head. It's like I feel like a chimpanzee going crazy here. And, you start off a little and you work up to, greater lengths of time. Keep trying to keep that, they call it the drunken monkey, inside our head calm, I
want to talk a little bit about some of the people that you interviewed.
Sure.
Because some of them, and let me ask you this, you have a pretty wide spectrum of people. Of this group that you published in this book, or even as I guess a statistical body broadly, generally what was the age group?
Oh, let's see. Do you want a median age of the...
Yeah, just a median.
Probably, right around 50.
Okay.
50 years old, yeah.
Okay.
I think I put in there, I don't know if I listed it, but, a couple had doctorate degrees, a couple master's degrees. I mean, these weren't very intelligent people, So I just want to make that noteworthy, that these were people with degrees and that had higher education that were having these experiences.
And do you think that there's a linkage to that, the higher intelligence, the overall greater achievement level? The fact that these people are not... No? No. I mean, look at at some of the... I don't know. Look at Ingo Swann. I don't think he's got that high of an education. But, it's like... No, I think it's the ability to... first of all, understand the experience and then be able to articulate it is what we're looking at here. So intelligence, I guess the reason I wanted to have, because there's this, what do you want to call this, stereotype. And that people have psychic experiences, they're stupid. There are people that are gullible, that believe in the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot. Okay? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And maybe Santa Claus, it's like they're always trying to put them in that category. They're just unintelligent, stupid people. And that's why I really wanted to try. I made an extra effort to find people with degrees to show that they're wrong. That people that are very intelligent are also having these types of experiences.
How difficult was it for you to find how do you go about locating people that want to talk about experiences like this? Because you know as well as I do, this is not something that the average person, if they are an experiencer, wants to discuss. In other words, there's some well-published people out there that have high profiles, but most experiencers of this type of phenomena are not going around talking about it in general, and most of them are very hidden.
Yeah. Well, you're right about that. I guess I got lucky in a sense, and I always like luck. I think I told you I was already working with quite a few extraterrestrial researchers, PhDs in this area. Mm-hmm. And, of course, they had information about people that they worked with because they were some of them were clinical psychologists, and some of these people were going to them to help them unravel the mystery of their experience. So I went around to these extraterrestrial research, and I said, hey, I'm doing a dissertation on this topic. If you know anybody that would like to talk to me about it, please have them contact me, and some of them contacted me. I went to a lot of workshops and just kind of weeded things out. I don't know. It's like, when you really concentrate on something, you put it out to the universe and you stick to it, you're going to get the answers. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And really, I think that's what happened with me. I call it luck, but also at the same time, I remained very open, for any possibility of a clue that somebody had this experience and wanted to talk to me about it. As soon as I found out who that person was, immediately I sent them a questionnaire. I just got on it right away. Let them know that, hey, I value your experience. Would you like to talk to me about it? So I didn't mess around. I just was very upfront about what I was doing. I didn't go and stereotype anybody, and I think people just trusted me. And the other thing about this was that I'm an experiencer, so I think it kind of opened up and made people more comfortable with it also, to be honest with you.
And you were pretty upfront about that?
Well, sure. You got to realize, even, scientists and everybody, that does this kind of work, every researcher, scientist, psychologist, they all have a bias, Randy. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
Now, the difference is a lot of them don't tell you what it is. I'm not that kind. I'll tell you right up front what my bias is, and because I think it helps with the research. Now, this is just starting to change, but, when people they're starting to understand this now, and maybe I work with other researchers now too, and they start saying, well, maybe I should be more open about my bias, because it is affecting my work, and they realize it is. So I think you're going to find this more and more as time goes on, that you're going to see people stating this more in studies.
I think my bias has been more balanced because I've interviewed now. I think the first couple of years that I did this type of research, I leaned more towards abductees who had dark stories, and I have tended to drift more towards the center in interviewing people like you who have what I think is a balancing effect on the conversation that's taking place. Because what I saw was a bias towards the gray abduction phenomena, the reptilians, and Draco phenomena that basically tilted the whole thing away from anything positive. That's not my experience. That's not my personal sense of things. But at the same time, I was horrified by what people were describing as alien abduction, which is, you know, a lot of what Dr. John Mack was doing, although I think he was very balanced as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so talking to somebody like you who's interviewed a lot of people like this balances the conversation, and it opens up, I guess, the better discussion, which is, first off, our biases have been that we're alone in the universe, which is statistically ridiculous, and from a sociological standpoint doesn't make sense. And we have basically dismissed a phenomena on the basis of this idea that we're stranded here in this rock somewhere without contact from other beings.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you this, with, these years that I put into this now, studying the alien abduction phenomena and what I'm calling my extraplanetary experience phenomena, is that a lot of people originally thought they were abducted. Okay? Now, as you work with these people and you process the information with them, some of them realize, hey, I really wasn't abducted. I was just so frickin' scared, I thought they did this to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So now, this is kind of hard to explain because, this takes years, working with individuals. And it depends on how they have processed their information. And that information can change through the years because they're not at the same place a few years later after they had time to develop the process more. Like I said, sometimes it's just dealing with a traumatic event.
Yes.
And the person is just stuck in the fear of the trauma. And they will not allow to release that fear, so they're just always going to remain in the fear. But people that have worked through some of these, and I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them, they realize after a few years that, man, I really wasn't abducted. I mean, they taught me things that I didn't like, I agree, but what they taught me was so valuable right now in my life, I'm looking at it more as, these are my friends. A good friend that actually showed me something of what I was doing wrong with my life. So it's kind of interesting to work with some of them on that level, and see how they come through it. It's kind of described like, you go to a spiritual, a guide or something, like you go to a priest, you go to a Zen master, okay? Some of these Zen masters, man, they can get a little punishing sometimes, hit you up alongside the head, say, stop it, you're doing the wrong thing. It's like, get with it, But through that experience, like learning the martial arts, I took years and years of Aikido. Believe me, in the beginning, it was not fun. Okay? It was like, I got to learn this, it's like, this is hard, it's painful. But now I look retrospectively, I said, man, I needed that. There's a part of me that could not accept doing it this way, So I hope that makes some sense that some people, as they unravel their experience, they realize it really wasn't an abduction.
I guess I need to ask you this as well. What are your thoughts on people who believe that they've been part of what's been called genetic harvesting, genetic experiments, people who are reporting very strange marks, people who are experiencing suddenly terminated pregnancies after strange experiences? Do you have a take on that?
Well, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. Like I said, I'm a little skeptical about that kind of activity, although, the implants are possible. Everything you mentioned is very possible. And I am not going to mess with somebody's reality. If they believe that happened to them. I'm not saying that it didn't happen, but if it was me, if they came to me and they asked me, they wanted a perspective on it, of course I would talk with them and I would give them a perspective of what I thought. But it's all subjective as far as I'm concerned. Everybody's experience is a little bit different.
I've kind of formulated an alternative to that in that I've been delving into an area that I guess you would call black ops, which is mill lab abductions, which seems to have a more terrestrial origin that's been masked somehow, which may be part of mind control projects.
Good point. Mm-hmm.
The more that I've delved into the abduction phenomena, the more I've seen overlap and commonality in terms of both the victims and the scenarios themselves that seem to overlap into black ops projects and basically mind control projects, which means we may have a whole group of people out there who have memories and they believe their memories and their memories are true, but what has actually happened is probably what I would call a screen memory.
Sure. Well, look at hypnosis. You can plant memories. I go into my book. It's easy to plant memories in people's head. Okay, easy.
Mm-hmm.
Through hypnosis, it's very easy. I mean, it's done all the time, and that's what some of my research is saying. Some people have proven this scientifically. With the help, somebody goes. I'll give you an example. A simple example. A woman's having a problem in her life. She's feeling depressed, in her midlife crisis, and she goes to her therapist, and the therapist suggests, well, maybe you were molested as a child. Okay? All of a sudden, that plants a seed. Although she may never have been molested. And it plants a seed. Well, that's my problem. I had to have been. And she starts feeding that. And this doesn't have to be just a woman, a man or a woman, or anybody, that's having problems in their whatever part of their life they're at. And usually it's at midlife, and that's what they call it, the midlife crisis. When people get in their 40s and 50s is when they really, I think, meet their dark side, and they should be looking at this a little bit differently. But they go to somebody that says, that supports a molestation process, so it's planted sometimes. And believe me, these people actually thought it happened to them, but then the research goes on. Investigators get involved, it goes to court, and then through all this, they find out, well, good chances they probably weren't. After all is said and done. Some people got to find meaning in their life, and they're desperate for it. Okay, I'm trying to get to, and it's when you're at that point, like I said, this midlife part is that it's easy to go with something that somebody's supporting you with, especially if it's a professional. Therapists, doctors, psychiatrists, people of authority. Be careful. That's all I can tell you.
So we will put you kind of on the skeptic side of the alien abduction thing. And that's fine.
Well, put me on the subjective side. Let me look at each one of them subjectively. Let me meet with them. Let me talk with them, and then I'll, go from there.
Okay. Now, and I wanted to press you on that just because, like I said, your book was a contrast to a lot of the other material out there, and even a contrast to a lot of Dr. John Mack's work. And like you said, you've been very upfront about your biases, and that's a fair way to approach this. We're going to take a break at the top of the hour, so we get a couple of minutes here. I have comment. They're asking Mr. Streicher, is it current understanding, sometimes it's hard to read text, current understanding on contact and getting proper perspective. We all have contact every night. I'm guessing that's a comment, but it sounds like a question. Do you have the sense that, and I don't believe everyone has contact, first off, and I don't think you do either. Is that a fair way to frame that?
Well, I guess I don't know what you mean by contact. If you're talking, what kind of contact? We all have, we usually go into sleep states at night. We have contact with the unconscious.
Yes, and
that's another reality, okay? But it's real. Okay, so those dreams that people are having and bring out of that, so that's contact to me. Now, I'm not exactly sure. You're going to have to really be more specific with me.
Well, you know what? When we come back on the other side, let's see if we can get some calls. And Colorado, you posted the comment. Maybe you'd like to call in and talk to us a little bit about this, because we all have contact every night. Well, that's probably, and that's his comment. I would guess that that's probably true on some level, given exactly what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we'll do at this point is take a top of the hour break for about 7 or 8 minutes and come back on the other side. We'll try and get some callers in, because I want to go through some of your witnesses, some of the people that you interviewed, and get your comments and insights into some of the things that they told you about, because some of it is very interesting, and some of it, to me, was kind of like, wow, I didn't see that coming. So I think we'll do that when we come back on the other side.
Sure, we can go through each one of them individually if you'd like.
Absolutely. We'll be back on the other side for Hour 2 of Off Planet Radio. I'm Randy Moggins. We'll be right back.